I knew him as Sambo. In 1933, he had a clothing store called Stone's Clothes. I had heard from his own lips his hardscrabble upbringing in Pittsburgh, how he'd worked in a coal mine. He washed soda bottles with acid until it ate at his fingertips. Given his hardships, it was no wonder he could identify with what the folks had gone through all around him in Canton. But I was to discover there was much more to his life and to his gift. I had his birth certificate, which showed he was born in Pittsburgh, as I knew. I had his passports, which confirmed it. I had many legal documents. But I'm an investigative reporter. I worked under Bob Woodward for many years at the Washington Post, and I started digging. And what I discovered was that all the documents were fraudulent. Sorry, Mom. All the documents were fraudulent, and in fact, there was no record of his birth in Pittsburgh, and the page that was listed was belonging to another person. And so I started looking through passenger lists, and lo and behold, I found him. I found him coming on a ship from Le Havre, France in 1902 at the age of 15. And when I pulled the list, I discovered that he was from a small village in Romania called Dorohoi. And when I looked into the history of Dorohoi in 1902, what I discovered was that he was a part of a group called the Fußgängers, or footwalkers, who fled Romanian persecution. He was Jewish. He fled Romanian persecution and pogroms on foot, like so many of the footwalkers, the Fußgängers, with nothing but rags on his back, and all of these thousands of people were rejected by country after country. And when he came to this country in 1902, others of his ilk had set up camp, so to speak, in Pittsburgh. Thousands of the Romanian Jews had settled there, and he settled there as well. But he was 15. He wasn't born there. This is a story that my mother did not know until I told her, nor did her sister Dotsie. My grandfather never even mentioned Romania, and I understand why. And by the way, they were so undesirable in this country. Both the Gentiles and the Jews did not want them. President Roosevelt, Theodore Roosevelt, filed a grievance with the country of Romania for their inhumane treatment of the Jews. But the Secretary of State made clear that it was not a humanitarian concern, it was the fear that they would be coming here. And he said as much, calling them a pestilential stock that would be a burden on us for a long, long time. So, imagine if the people of Canton had known that their secret Santa that Christmas, the one who in the ad wished them a merry and joyful Christmas, was born an Orthodox Jew who as a child kept kosher and spoke nothing but Yiddish. I now believe that he chose a Gentile holiday, Christmas, to express his appreciation to this new land that accepted him when no one else would, and to reach out to those who, like himself, had so little. Finding the descendants of the letter writers was not always easy. I searched death records, cemetery records, obituaries, census records, marriage licenses, city directories, genealogical documents. I interviewed over 500 people for the book. What emerges is a vision of a very, very different America. And this is critical. There was no net to catch the falling. No Social Security, no unemployment, no Medicare, no Medicaid, no food stamps, no aid to families with dependent children, no FDIC, nothing. All of that was to come later because of what they endured. In December 1933, the New Deal was little more than a glint in FDR's eye. One could starve to death in plain view, and government was powerless to help. And many in Canton were far too proud to accept a handout, even if there were one. One of the gentlemen who wrote to Beaver Dot talked about the city offering him a packet of seeds for his garden. He refused. He was too proud. Many said they would sooner starve than take out a handout. Government was small and remote then. The word entitlement, that we hear so much about, had no place in the American vocabulary, much less the American budget. But Beaver Dot's offer was different. He spoke their language, he was one of them, and so they could reach out to him. Reading the letters, I was struck by the selfless tone. Few asked anything for themselves. It was for their spouses, their children, their parents, their neighbors, and they expressed concern for them, not for themselves. It was not government they looked to, but family and community. That's how it was in America then. Doctors delivered babies without so much as a dime in payment. Morticians buried the dead with no hope of getting money. Milk continued to be delivered to those homes with babies, knowing the bill was well beyond their means. Grocers extended credit to the hungry until they were so strung out in debt themselves that they lost their businesses. People carried people. Government had no role to play. Not yet. We hear much these days about the greatest generation, but the greatest generation was born in the Great Depression. That was what taught them sacrifice. That's what steeled them. That's what made them resourceful. I want to share some letters with you, and I'm going to watch the clock because I want to hear from you. And I suspect that some of what I say may trigger some memories in you, perhaps your own lives or those of your parents. I'm going to tell you first about George Monnet. By 1928, he was accorded 3 full pages in the county history of Stark County, where Canton is located. He's dressed in a suit and tie, a perfect part in his hair, and he looks every bit the exemplar of corporate America. By that year, his Ford dealership occupied an entire city block, and a cavernous showroom was his. The company even had its own 11-person band that dressed in tuxes. In Canton, the Monnet name was well known. His father had been a councilman. His wife, Alice, was a socialite and belonged to the Canton Women's Club. George Monnet was a prominent member of the Better Business Bureau, the Canton Chamber of Commerce, the Canton Club, and the Brookside Country Club. The history said of Monnet that, quote, he had developed an enterprise of mammoth proportions. He has steadily worked his way upward through determination and ability until he is now numbered among the foremost men of his native city, close quote. He had a yacht and he had a summer home on a lake. But the crash of 1929 took it all. 4 years later, in 33, he had nothing. This is what he wrote to Biddeford. Dear Sir, your interesting and benevolent article appearing in the repository prompted me to write and advise how the Depression left the writer. For 26 years was in the automobile business, prosperous at one time, and have done more than my share in giving at Christmas and at all times. Have a family of 6, and struggle is the word for me now, for a living. Christmas will not mean much to our family this year, as my business, bank, real estate, insurance policies are all swept away. Our resources are nil at present. Perhaps my situation is no different than hundreds of others. However, a man who knows what it is to be up and down can fully appreciate the spirit of one who has gone through the same ordeal. You are to be congratulated for your benevolence and kind offer to those who have experienced this trouble, and such as the writer is going through. No doubt you will have a happy Christmas, as there is more real happiness in giving and making someone else happy than receiving. May I extend to you a very happy Christmas. George W. Monnet. It's a lovely letter. He lost everything, but he did not lose his dignity. 3 days later, on December 21st, 1933, check number 22 for $5 and signed Biddeford arrived at George Monnet's home. A thank you note soon followed from Mr. Monnet. My dear Mr. Biddeford, permit me to offer my sincere thanks for your kind remembrance for a happy Christmas. Indeed, this came in very handy and was much appreciated by myself and family. It was put to good use, paying for 2 pairs of shoes for my girls and other little necessities. I hope someday I have the pleasure of knowing to whom we are indebted for this very generous gift. At present, I am not of employment, and it is very hard going. However, I hope to make some connection soon. I again thank you on behalf of the family, and an earnest wish is that you have a most happy New Year. Sincerely yours, George W. Monnet. So what became of George W. Monnet? George W. Monnet never did get back to the position he once knew. Never. He worked as a clerk in a factory that made engines outside of Canton, the Hercules factory. And in the evenings, he would go into his basement because the one thing he saved from the car dealership was his tool chest. And he would go into the basement and try to invent something that might restore his family to some kind of financial stability and security. But it didn't happen. He had gone from owning 1,000 cars to owning none. He took the bus to work. He lived in a narrow alleyway. At 75, he was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. He died 2 months later, in February of 1949. On a chilly Tuesday morning, he was accorded a Requiem High Mass that was sung in his honor, and he's buried in the church cemetery. The huge wooden chest that belonged to him now belongs to his son, Jeffrey Earl Haas, who was raised on many of the lessons of the Great Depression: not to spend foolishly, not to go into debt, to work hard. He has the chest now. He's 65, and he enjoys many of the material comforts that his grandfather had once known. He divides his time between a home in America and one in England that is on the famous Wentworth Golf Course and near both Windsor Castle and Ascot Racetrack. A collector of ancient Greek coins and an avid scuba diver, the retired Procter & Gamble vice president owns a Mercedes and a Porsche, but no Fords. As for the vast building that George Monnet's Ford dealership once was located at, today it is a museum for classic cars, purely coincidental. And in the midst of it all is parked a gleaming Model T. And it doesn't take much of a stretch of imagination to see, with the lights low, the ghost of Mr. Monnet proudly showing off his latest model.